Dead by Daylight is a game that gets a lot, and I mean a lot of flack. It's difficult to get into, there are controversies surrounding its almost pay-to-win nature, and it can be terribly frustrating to play. It's a game with a lot of flaws, and whether you play it casually or like your life depends on it, this statement is kinda objective. Even so, there's one thing that gets criticized just as much as the game itself, and that would be the potent toxicity within the fanbase. Hey, it's Not a Police Games, aka MPG. I recently got back into DBD about a month or two ago after a 1.5 year long break, and after playing again, something became immediately apparent. This game changed so much and so little at the same time. There were new killers, new survivors, new perks, new maps, even new items, and yet I still felt as though I'd never left. This was, in part, due to the game's very, very toxic fanbase. I don't think I need to tell you that the fanbase is toxic because that'd be as useful as me telling you that water is wet. I just want to explore what could have caused such toxicity in the community of a game this unique. I've been wanting to make another DBD video for a bit, so if you enjoy this one, make sure to check out my other one. I'm gonna get to the point before I start thinking about the 500 pages of bullshit I have to read by tomorrow. So let's start off with a simple statement. Dead by Daylight is not beginner friendly, not in the slightest. There's a lot to understand, it can be buggy or unfair, and there are constant updates that only further complicate things. DBD and its many quirks are notoriously difficult to comprehend, and to make it worse, the game does not introduce the game's endless quirks and mechanics very well. Personal account here, I started playing the game back in 2022 and tended to play in a Swift. Safe to say, we all sucked ass for a few weeks, and this is partially due to the tutorial not preparing you for the kind of things you'll be doing. In order to get as good as I needed to be and understand as much as I needed to, I had to watch hours and hours of videos made by very talented YouTubers like Namedi, Ots, Puffalope, and others like them. I also had to play basically every day, and I'm just so lucky my first year of university was as easy as it was, because that shit is not easy anymore. To some, adapting to the game may not be such a daunting task, but for most, I imagine it's a constant uphill battle. After coming back to the game, I just found it so annoying to try and figure out what the new killers were all about that I just started winging it. Trial and error can be your friend, but only if you, 1, kinda know what you're doing and if there's anything you need to do differently, and 2, know you're at least making progress. If you're a newbie, it'll feel like you're constantly having things thrown your way that make little to no sense. It's one thing if you can understand more or less what's going on, but sometimes there's not much you can do. For instance, you could be playing the game for months, never see one specific killer, and then see them out of nowhere and not know or remember how to play against them. Alongside that, playing this game and trying to understand the many perks or base mechanics the game offers is, well, it's a necessity and also really, really annoying. Every killer is insanely unique and requires not only knowledge on how they work, but different playstyles. Running into, let's say, a doctor or spirit as a newbie can be really discouraging. Shit, running into a spirit now is discouraging. Anyway, it may seem like trying to understand the game and how it works isn't worth it. Beginner survivors aren't the only ones who may have a hard time though. Killers all come with their frustrations and quirks, and it could take hundreds of hours to get good at playing the role. If you get into Dead by Daylight just to play your favorite antagonist like Springtrap, you're in for a very rude surprise. Killer in general requires a lot of strategy, thought, and on-the-spot decision-making that most newbies aren't at all prepared for. Shit, I'm not even ready for it whenever I play Killer once in a blue moon. That being said, this game is frustrating no matter if you're a rookie or a veteran. The amount of information you have to retain in order for DBD to even be somewhat enjoyable is actually kinda crazy. This can lead to so many people becoming frustrated, which is totally understandable. Even knowing as much as you possibly can is not a fix-all because the game is riddled with more bugs than the House of a Hoarders episode. That, paired with the enlightenment you have to obtain to understand how to play, can make it really, really easy to get tilted. The game requires players to play at their best or utilize their perks and environment to the best of their ability. The game isn't meant to be competitive, there's no ranked mode, but a lot of people play this game very seriously. This isn't inherently a bad thing, but when the game requires you to practice in order to just enjoy it, people can form a real nasty chip on their shoulder real quick. Doing your best, which is a lot because just a single match of this game can be really tiring, and that not being enough can feel pretty awful. Games that easily overwhelm a player and or are so complex in gameplay when the game itself is buggy and sometimes can't handle that complexity is more than enough to make even the calmest person angry. And DBD is one of those games. Already, it's exceedingly simple to become angry during the game and maybe play a little petty due to your own frustrations. That's not even the half of it. Sure, DBD can be very exasperating to play just due to its sometimes confusing and complicated mechanics and quirks, but that's just part of the reason why people get a little toxic. Now, don't get me wrong, DBD is multifaceted. Sometimes you'll get matches against people who have personality and simply want to play the game. I've had some amazing moments playing this game, even if I didn't win, simply because of the people I got to play with and take tips from. It's an ever-growing community that honestly doesn't get enough credit for the relationships it can build between players. But unfortunately, there's actually a very apparent divide in this game, that being between survivors and killers. Of course, for a game like DBD that pits the two against each other, you're gonna have people who are a bit salty about their opposition. But this, in regard to how survivors and killers feel about each other, couldn't be more of an understatement. These two groups are so obsessed with pissing each other off and showing each other up that it's a bit strange. It's like both a dick measuring and rage baiting contest happening at the same exact time. A lot of survivors and killers straight up refuse to understand the other's point of view. If they are not winning with barely any effort on their part or as few hiccups as possible, they get insanely offended and take it very personally. There's a shit ton of entitlement oozing from both sides, and you don't need 10,000 hours in the game to see that. You get survivors who aim at nothing but to make the killer angry by running mean-spirited builds and maybe even using exploits. Then you have killers who do the same, but this usually involves tunneling, camping, and slugging for little to no reason. Now, things like tunneling and camping can be legit strats, but I almost never run into killers who do it because they need to. It's usually because they're angry I've looped them for more than 10 seconds. Some situations can seem downright unwinnable or even unfair, and in that case, I definitely understand being angry. Take my boyfriend Jay's account for example, since he plays killer more than I do. He played 2 matches, one as Pig and one as Ghostface. He didn't tunnel, camp, or slug during these matches, and because the survivors were efficient and really messed up, he lost. When Jay started tunneling though, the matches became infinitely easier and he almost never lost. I'll talk about tunneling and slugging a little later, but the fact that the game can push you into playing like this is bad for reasons I'll explain also later. For Survivor, there's a few things I can list that makes the experience pretty annoying. Survivors cannot communicate with each other outside of basic emotes unless you happen to be playing in a Swift and are calling on Discord. This is actually a good thing because a lot of people would get banned the first week if voice chat got added. Even so, survivors can't talk to each other, so you might be sitting on hook waiting for the other 3, or god forbid, 7 survivors to get you just for you to die on hook. This happened to me twice in a row during a 2v8 match, and no one was doing anything. Brain dead survivors, especially in solo queue, can make you a little worried that these people can vote. So imagine doing everything right during a match. You're on gens whenever possible, loop the killer for a decent amount of time, and go for saves, and are all around a really good teammate just for everyone else to not do that. Again, Dead by Daylight can be a lot all at once, so to be doing everything correctly and still lose because of something out of your control is far from joy-inducing. It's one thing to not be the best player ever, but the decisions some survivors make can end a game before it's even truly started. For example, if a teammate is getting tunneled in solo queue, gen progression does not need to stop. The world's gonna keep spinning, it's not that serious. Optimally, only one person should be off the gen trying to help the other survivor, while the other 2 should just continue doing the objective. This does not always happen, unfortunately. A lot of survivors, especially solo queue ones, become so frazzled whenever they experience a tunneling killer that they make silly mistakes and bad choices that are honestly worse for their team than the fact the killer is tunneling. And these things go unaddressed. Survivors will not reflect on what to do to ensure tunneling isn't a game ender in the future, they instead just think tunneling is completely unacceptable in any situation. There are going to be things that survivors or killers do that are simply optimal, even if the other side dislikes it. Don't get me wrong, getting tunneled or camped sucks a lot, but you can't deny that it's the optimal way to play, no matter if you're winning the game or not. Finally hooking the first survivor of the game in 3 gens pop though is also not a great feeling for killer, but is optimal for survivors. In both situations, you are simply speeding through objectives regardless of how the side you're playing against feels about it. To be fair though, it's easier for the killer to play optimally than it is for survivors due to there being more solo queue survivors than the ones playing in a Swift. Killers only need the cooperation of themselves to play this way, while survivors need each other's cooperation but won't typically get it if they're not playing in a Swift. Despite lack of communication not being solo queue survivors' fault, I have found myself getting so insanely angry at what some of these survivors have been doing that I have to sit in silence and recollect myself before I keep playing because, like, am I really getting this mad over a game? Completing objectives faster to minimize hiccups is the optimal way to play and should be what both sides aim to achieve, right? Well, I think we're underestimating just how entitled a lot of these players are. I genuinely feel as though DBD just attracted the most power-hungry and condescending pricks with the fragilest fucking egos on the planet. Every game, especially online ones, has their toxic players. Most of the time, even the players who aren't toxic are doing basic trash talk that most people do during games. This is normal and it's just the way that online games are. A lot of the time it's harmless fun, even if you do have a few bad apples, it doesn't automatically make the games unbearable. That being said, a decent chunk of DBD's player base is very adamant about making games unbearable for their opposition or even their own teammates. It goes further than just the occasional sandbagging or slugging. I've seen players time and time again go out of their way to make playing DBD as miserable as possible. I mentioned a few examples before, but I want to go in depth a little more. Imagine this. A match boots up and every survivor becomes aware of who the killer is. Then, frustratingly enough, a survivor absolutely refuses to play against the killer because they find them annoying or stuck at looping, which sours the entire match for their teammates. Sometimes, instead of DCing, this salty-ass survivor will wait to die and fuck over their teammates because they feel entitled to have fun. You're playing Dead by Daylight, so I don't know why you expected that. It's not fun for killer either. Usually a match won because of your skill is way better than winning just because it was handed to you. Then you have survivors who go against one toxic killer who BMs and holds the game hostage and think it justifies them unleashing all their rage onto the next killer, who did absolutely nothing but boot into the game, by the way. To be honest, this could happen just from a toxic survivor main losing whether the killer was toxic or not. It's one thing to use an annoying build if you're only using it to give your teammates extra chances and waste the killer's time so gens can get done. It's another thing entirely to purposely approach the killer knowing all you want to do is annoy them rather than do the game's objectives. Of course, not everyone who uses these builds to annoy killers is super duper toxic or wants to make playing killer terrible. Sometimes it is just a way to be cheeky and you don't have to play just so someone else enjoys the game, but it can be awful for killer, not gonna lie. Speaking of killer, a lot of them feel just as entitled to the most ideal match ever so they don't have to call their own skill or lack thereof into question. A lot of killer mains might play a particularly strong or hard to counter killer in the hopes that it'll make their matches a breeze. Going against survivors who not only know what to do, but don't make your cheeses as easy peasy as you imagine can leave anyone feeling inadequate and kinda pressed. Killers may be trying their best and getting hooks whenever they can, only for survivors to just be playing better than they are and the game begins to tilt in the favor of those survivors. Again, whether or not their survivors play with grace and humility or like an asshole, a killer with a bruised ego and something to prove might just take their anger out on the next poor survivor. Then those survivor players who may already not like killer will feel validated in their feelings and start playing, you get the point. It's a never-ending cycle of players taking their anger and resentment out on their opposition and breeding more toxicity. As well as being assholes to each other, killers and survivors expect a lot of grace from one another. There's player etiquette in basically every online game, but in Dead by Daylight's case, I'd say people expect a little too much. Mind you, these expectations only cause more frustrations when they're not met. Things that are simple like teabagging a gate, hitting on hook, or shaking your head is more than enough for a lot of players to lose their minds. I'm assuming it's because they're already frustrated, so anything else that happens during the match that can be seen as rude is just the cherry on top. I also think it's kinda dumb to get mad at harmless things like this, but I definitely get it and I'll get into that a little bit later. So you can of course say, don't play like you're having the worst day of your life, but like I mentioned before, there are things that can be seen as rude but are also optimal for players to do. Tunneling and camping hooks and gens is optimal for killers, while gen rushing and prolonging chase for as long as possible is optimal for survivors. The real problem is that neither side tries to understand each other and then calls these ways of playing toxic. They definitely can be, but they aren't all the time. Shit, a lot of people get so mad that they might turn the game off and complain on some forum somewhere. Speaking of which, surprisingly enough, the DBD subreddit isn't too bad from what I've seen, but there are a few problematic posts there. That's to be expected though. I do get more of a sense of the divide between survivors and killers on the subreddit than anywhere else though. I found it pretty shocking to see just how many survivor or killer mains were just so unaware of their actions. It was as if they were unable to see the way they were playing was toxic and refused to see anyone else's point of view, like the act of doing so might kill them in real life. Survivors were annoyed at killer mains just playing their killer and using their quirks to the best of their ability. Killers were annoyed at survivors were looping them for more than 15 seconds. Like, get better or lose with grace and go on to the next game, I don't know what to tell you. Again, both sides are severely lacking in the self-awareness department. I'd say I'm a decent survivor, good even, but I'm far from the best. That being said, if I die, I'm not going to immediately assume it's the killer's fault for literally doing their objective. A good part of playing DBD is being able to understand your opposition and make decisions by making educated guesses, basically. If I know a huntress is going to always pull up at pallets, chances are I'm not going to drop it. If a survivor is clearly trying to get in your face and waste your time, something important, maybe even crucial, is happening away from them. Learning how to play your main isn't just about understanding who you're playing as, but also who you're playing against. Survivors and killers who understand each other are terrifying to play against, and it might make games less frustrating. Except, a lot of toxic or entitled players don't care about that. They push us versus them posts like they're getting paid to do it, and it only further divides the community when we already don't need much help with that. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, complaints from both sides, usually the survivor's not gonna lie, can cause the devs to kill switch, nerf, or buff killers or perks.
Having fun with off limits in Mister's house.
Nigga, did I just catch you having fun?
Now, being able to listen to your community and know when something might need to be changed is important for an ever-changing game like DBD. Even so, not every piece of advice from killers or survivors is the best. Some ideas or wanted changes are either pointless or shit, only operating to make the game easier for one side. Perks and add-ons that don't need to be changed get nerfed into oblivion and become practically unusable. Killers who were once only a slight struggle to go against are changed again and again and become so weak that they're basically unplayable. Like, that new anti-slug and tunnel change they were going to go through with. To be fair, I didn't think it'd get past the PTB, but just the idea of it was ridiculous. I hate being tunneled as much as the next person, but you know a patch is bad when almost every competent player agrees that it's ass. Forcing a killer's hand and threatening to make the game harder for them if they don't follow very specific rules is annoying as all hell. The anti-face camp change was great because if a killer face camped, the survivor could continue playing even if no one saved them. It wasn't the punishment for killer, just more so a way for the survivor to keep playing. The anti-slug and anti-tunnel change basically forces the killers to play in a way that may not be smart. I have seen survivors who are just unhooked purposely get in the way of the killer and take hits for another survivor. Of course, this isn't bad to do since the unhooked survivor has BT and the other does not, but chasing the unhooked survivor seems like the most viable option, right? Or what if the killer low-key sucks and needs to tunnel in order to build pressure? The survivor wouldn't be able to take a protection hit for the other survivor as they'd lack collision, sure, but my point still stands. Having to resort to tunneling is kind of a skill issue, not gonna lie, but it does indeed help, and having the choice to do so is good. So, as much as this change would have helped me in my Swifts, it just felt, I don't know, dirty. Tunneling, in my opinion, is a lazy way to play and requires barely any skill, but it's a viable strat and should not be punished, especially not in the way the devs were planning. Imagine you try looping other survivors who run circles around you all day, so you're forced to go for the weak link and you can't even do that without consequence. Makes it even worse since the change would have made it so you wouldn't even be notified that a survivor was unhooked until like 10 seconds later. That's bullshit. I also feel as though the anti-slugging thing could have been fine if not for the issues it caused with survivors taking advantage of how it works. Getting slugged on the ground for over 90 seconds is ridiculous, but a lot of killers play for that 4K like their family is being held at gunpoint. Fair enough, I'm competitive too. I wouldn't want to take a chance that a match goes poorly because I didn't slug. It's not ideal. I don't think it's very fun for killer either, but sometimes it's necessary, and taking away the killer's choices is really something. It wouldn't have even been a change that changes the game that substantially for killer players who main S-tier killers like the nurse. All it would have done, in my opinion, is overcomplicate a game that's already complicated and make playing killer somehow more miserable. In short, the killers and survivors' own frustrations can lead to the game being imbalanced, buggy, or unfair, which leads to more frustrations and more tug-of-war bullshit. Also, I mentioned bugs earlier, but I don't think a lot of people realize just how badly optimized this game is. It's a game that requires updates often and honestly takes up more space than it should. Then, to make matters worse, the 1 million updates it receives may not even fix every problem. Behind every fix is the need for like 7 more. I understand wanting to make your player base happy, but I can't feel like behavior goes about it the complete wrong way a lot of the time. Their decisions aren't well thought out or informed, which is funny considering that this is their game. While they're very connected to their community, they also lack self-awareness and don't take criticism very well. It makes it clear to me that the reason why players attracted to DBD are so instantly pretentious and have inflated as egos is because some of the people at behavior are kinda the same way. No offense. It's been push and pull for years, and the fact that this new update was even a consideration is, I don't know. I understand survivors being tilted about tunneling. It must really suck to hop on the game after a long day of doing whatever just to get targeted and killed for loading into a match. That sucks, but if it happens so often that it becomes an issue, use anti-tunneling perks. It's kind of what they're there for. So to say that the anti-tunneling and slugging update would have killed the game, well, I guess we'll never know. They had the right intentions, but with this game, the update couldn't have been worse, not gonna lie. So Dead by Daylight is toxic. Everyone who's played the game, I'm sure, has encountered toxicity or time or 10. I actually know quite a bit about the toxicity plaguing DBD because sometimes it gets to me and starts controlling my body like a goddamn symbiote. Playing a game like this and trying my best to understand it can be difficult, sure, but most of the time I'm getting mad at myself for the way I play. I'm a survivor main, and honestly, it's not typical that I get mad at the killer, especially if they're just trying to have fun just like me. But sometimes, I feel the rage of the most emotionally stable DBD players consuming me. It can be something small, like a killer who downs me only because they got lucky, and while I'm downed, they start shaking their heads at me, like, who the fuck do you think you are? One thing I hate are people who constantly act like they're the best at everything when in reality they suck, and there's no shortage of players like this in DBD. Stay with solo queue teammates. It's one thing to be overly confident, but to be wrong too? Absolutely sinful. This should be getting to me too, so I can totally understand why people are as salty about this game as they are. Something as simple as a nod of the head or a teabag at exit gate can do it for me, and that's why I really feel like this game is one you actively have to work not to get mad at. Yeah, there's a reason why DBD streamers that don't get mad at the game are seen as a rarity. The game could be so much better with changes, but at the end of the day, would it change the way toxic players play? Would it change them existing? Could it even be possible? I'm not sure. All I know is that DBD could use some major modifications. What those modifications could be? Don't look at me, it's not like anyone's going to be satisfied with the changes anyway. Anyway, enough of that train wreck. What do you think of this video? Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments. Make sure to like and subscribe too if you'd like. This is MPG, I'll catch you later. Peace!